Here I've launched the Analysis Services Deployment Wizard from the Microsoft SQL Server 2008 R2 program group. We'll click Next, and here I'm being prompted for a database file. So I can provide the path here, or I can use the Browse button to navigate to the file. And remember from the previous demonstration that we had to use the build command in BIDS to generate the AS database file in the bin folder for our project. Once we have that file, we can then use this wizard successfully. Let's click Next to continue. And here it asks us for the server name that we want to use for deployment purposes, as well as the database name. We can keep the same name, or we can provide a different name. Let's call this AW for AdventureWorks Datamart. Then it asks us what we want to do if there are existing partitions and roles, but since this is the first time that we've deployed this particular database, we'll just keep the default settings. Next, we have a variety of settings that control the configuration. For example, we have the connection string, which we can change here from our development server perhaps to a production server, and we can either change the string directly here or use this button to open up the Connection Manager dialog box. We can also change the impersonation information to provide a specific domain and user account, or we can specify use the service account, or we can have the current user's credentials being used, which is generally not a good idea for production purposes, or we can instruct analysis services to look to the database configuration, which we can manage on the server directly. As an example, here's the impersonation information that we can specify as the default, and using Management Studio, we have an opportunity to update that information as well. Moving on, we have configuration information for the key error log files. So for each of our measure groups in our cube, we have a single partition, and for each partition, we can identify a location where we want to store the log files, and we can see the default specified here, but we can certainly override that. We can provide separate log files for each partition and for each dimension. Then we have the database storage location. If we leave it blank, the server's data directory will be used. If you recall from the previous demonstration, we saw the database folders underneath the OLAP data folder for the Analysis Services instance. But we can override that location here. We can also put each partition of each measure group into separate locations. For example, we might decide to put each partition on a separate drive as a way of managing the I/O operations on the server. Then we need to specify whether processing will occur immediately after deployment. We can choose default processing, which Analysis Services will proceed with processing only if there are new definitions for any of our database objects. Or we can force processing to occur by using full processing, and in either of those cases we have the option to treat the processing as a single transaction. So if a few dimensions got processed and the next dimension fails, then the existence of the transaction would roll back the processing of those other dimensions. We'll go ahead and leave the default value of none here. Then, because we want to give our script to an administrator to execute on the server, we'll select the Create Deployment Script checkbox here. And you can see that in our projects bin folder, we'll have a script file saved as an XMLA file. So we'll click Next and complete the wizard. Now let's open Management Studio, where we can execute where we can execute that script. We'll connect to Analysis Services. And we'll open the XMLA file that was generated by that wizard. So imagine a production scenario where you simply give the script file to an administrator and they can open up Management Studio where the script file can be executed. And here we see a batch command with a transaction set to false, using an alter command for the particular database here, which will create the database if it does not already exist. And then as we scroll through, we can see that it's much the same information that we would see in the AS database file. It's just been encapsulated within some processing commands. So all we need to do is to execute this file, and we can see that the query executed successfully. And we now have an AW Data Mart database, but it's not ready to be queried yet because we have not processed it. Typically in a production environment, we would have integration services packages executing on a regular basis to process our cubes.